Thanks so much for joining us. I'm here today with Dr. Colin Ross. He is an author and psychiatrist based out of Dallas, Texas, and he is a leading expert on the CIA mind control experiments, especially MK-Ultra. So today we're actually talking about some of the specific experiments and techniques that were being used in those experiments. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So can you just kind of give us a brief overview of some of the mind control techniques that were being used?
Sure. There's a variety of them that are all parts of the Manchurian Candidate program. So one is LSD and other hallucinogens. There's a movie called Jacob's Ladder, which was, I think, the 70s. And it starts with a combat scene in Vietnam where it's just complete chaos and the U.S. soldiers are hallucinating. They're in the jungle, there's a big firefight, and you just assume that this is a Hollywood movie. And then it goes into scenes where there's a chemist who's involved in this drug BZ. And I assumed, again, it was just made up. But actually, BZ is one of the drugs that's in the hallucinogen class. It's even more powerful than LSD. Wow. And it was given to a lot of different soldiers at Edgewood Arsenal. The LSD experiments were done really around the country. The LSD would be given to incarcerated drug offenders. At Lexington, Kentucky was one location. And so all of these things are in the CIA documents. It's declassified. There's project numbers. There's the year the project started, the size of the grant. It's all completely documented.
Right.
One of the most odd ones is 3 or 4 projects run by a guy named George White, who is a Bureau of Narcotics agent. And most of it was in San Francisco, a little bit in New York. And what they did is, when you look at the documents, they basically purchased a whole bunch of materials, rented an apartment, and set it up to look like a brothel with purple sheets and satin and all kinds of stuff. They had a one-way mirror set up. And then George White hired prostitutes, had the prostitutes go to bars and pick guys up, bring them back to the safe house, slip them a dose of LSD, and have sex with them while the CIA guys were watching through the one-way mirror. All described in detail in the documents.
Wow.
And so you wonder, why would they be doing that? And it says in the documents, the purpose of it is to test the effect of LSD on an unwitting subject under conditions that mimic an interrogation. So the idea is, you're going to be interrogating somebody, you got them in a jail cell, you slip them some LSD without their knowledge. How are they going to react?
Wow.
And then in one of the internal memos, that's a letter from one CIA guy to another, talking about this safe house project, which was called Operation Midnight Climax. It says it's very difficult creating a Jekyll-Hyde personality. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, hold on a second here. Now, this is not a fact, this is a theory. It's a fact that it says in the document, it's very difficult to create a Jekyll-Hyde personality. So they couldn't possibly have been creating a Jekyll-Hyde personality in the prostitutes, in the Johns, because they only came in once, got stoned, had sex, and left. So what I'm thinking is, there was 2 layers to this. One is testing the effect of LSD on an unwitting subject. The other is seeing whether a Manchurian Candidate prostitute could carry out the operation of doing that.
Wow.
So that's what I suspect, not what I know.
Wow, that's incredible. So what were some of the other experiments that were being done?
Another set of experiments involved brain electrode implants, which are in the Manchurian Candidate movie by Denzel Washington. And again, you would think, oh, science fiction. But these go back into the 50s. There was a man at Harvard who was a neurosurgeon called Jose Delgado. No, he was at Yale, sorry. And there was another electrode implant team at Harvard. Jose Delgado, you can find on YouTube quite easily a video of him where there's a bull enters the arena that has electrodes implanted in its brain. It's going to take a charge at Jose Delgado. He pushes a button on the transmitter box, which sends a radio signal to the implanted electrode, and the bull just turns away. And he describes doing these kind of experiments on children as young as 11 years old.
Oh my.
Under the guise of treatment for epilepsy, which was totally bogus. And he was funded by the Office of Naval Research. And he interacted with the implant team at Harvard, who interacted with the implant team at UCLA, and they also interacted with an implant team at Tulane.
Wow.
Where a Dr. Robert Heath would put electrodes in people's brains and then also introduce directly into their brains LSD, mescaline, and other hallucinogens.
Wow.
Probably the most extreme and oddest experiment at Tulane was, this is 1972 or so it was published. So he describes, there's a guy who suffers from homosexuality, which was a psychiatric disorder back then. And he brings him into Tulane, puts a brain electrode in his head, and basically has him watch heterosexual pornography while his electrodes are being stimulated. And they're trying to recondition him to be heterosexual.
Wow.
And then they let him have a little box on his belt where he could push a button that would stimulate his brain and bring him up to a sort of pre-orgasm state. But they had to take it away from him because he pushed the button 1,500 times in 3 hours. This is all in the published paper in a psychiatry journal. And then they describe, after they'd conditioned this guy for months, they hired a prostitute, had her come into the Tulane hospital, have sex with him while he was hooked up to electrodes, and then after debriefed him, debriefed the prostitute, and studied his brain waves. And they claimed they cured him of homosexuality, but he did have one relapse and a short follow-up.
Wow.
So these are the documented experiments that went on, so you can just imagine what's still classified.
Yeah, exactly. And of all of the documentation that was burned or destroyed or ruined, this is just a small amount of what we have. Another thing that's interesting is that, this wasn't going on in some underground laboratory with some, very, strange scientists. These were going on at major universities. These experiments were receiving major funding.
Right. The universities that had top secret clearance and were contractors on MKUltra included basically who's who of American universities: Yale, Harvard, Cornell, Columbia, Tulane.
Wow.
On and on it goes. University of Denver, University of Minnesota.
Wow.
So it's major universities, and it's also major psychiatrists who are the top publishers in the field, editors of journals. The American Psychological Association itself was a top secret cleared contractor.
Wow. So what are some other, we talked about LSD, we talked about the brain implants. What are some other methods and techniques that we might have seen in some of these
Well, hypnosis is another big one, and sensory deprivation. So hypnosis contractors included Martin Orne and Louis Jolyon West, two well-known psychiatrists who published extensively, were cleared at top secret level by the CIA. And their job was to study the uses of hypnosis in interrogation, inserting false memories, removing memories, and creating Manchurian candidates, which are described very clearly in the documents. And both of them are connected in terms of co-publishing, attending the same workshops and so on, with George Estabrooks, who was at Colgate College in upstate New York, whose corresponds with J. Edgar Hoover over several decades I have. And he did workshops on military bases, had FBI and military people come to his workshops, all of which were on creating the super spy equals the Manchurian candidate under hypnosis. All, again, totally documented.
Wow. So what were some of the applications of this research? From their perspective, how effective was this research at what they were looking to find out? It's hard to tell
exactly how effective all these things were, because so much of the information is lost or still classified. But they describe, especially in Bluebird Artichoke documents, safe house interrogations on U.S. soil, which is by itself a violation of the CIA's charter, because they're not supposed to conduct operations on U.S. soil, where the Artichoke team, so-called, is brought in. There's interrogations done with IV, drugs, alcohol, hypnosis, and this is called the Artichoke technique. And so these things were, in the documents, are described as being used operationally repeatedly. And all of these, going back to 1950 up to 1972 mind control programs, basically were the foundation for manuals published by the military in the time frame of the 80s, 90s, which are the foundation for advanced, enhanced interrogations at Guantanamo Bay today.
Wow. So obviously in the 1970s, they terminated MK Ultra. Is there a possibility that there's experiments like this still being conducted?
I would say first of all, it's not proven or documented because it's all classified.
Right.
But it's absolutely inconceivable that all these programs stopped. And my position on it is, because I'm not against the military as such, against the CIA as such, against the government as such, I'm against the ethics of some of these experiments. I think that the psychiatrists hugely violated medical ethics.
Right.
But my position is that if the CIA and the military weren't actively looking into this operationally today, they would be failing to do their job, because we have to know how this technology operates and works purely from a defensive perspective, because these kind of people surely are being run at us by foreign terrorist organizations and intelligence organizations. So purely from a defensive perspective, I'd say we should be up to speed, and if we're not, they're not doing their job. And of course, defensive and offensive are always intertwined and going on at the same time.
Right.
So I would say it's got to be the case that these programs are operational, offensive, and defensive currently.
Interesting. So you seem confident that there's still perhaps experimentation like this still being conducted. Is there any evidence to support that, or?
Well, first of all, I think it's implausible that it's not going on. But there, in fact, is evidence in the public domain reported on by Seymour Hersh and mainstream reporters having to do with Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay.
Okay. So you would say that those two situations have a clear link back to the MKUltra studies?
It's very clear that the currently operational interrogation techniques go back to prior military manuals, which go back to MKUltra, Bluebird, Artichoke.
Wow, that's very interesting. So it does seem pretty clear that some of these techniques are still being used today. We're going to wrap up for now, but we'll talk more about that in a future video, how these interrogation techniques are still being used in current times. So please be sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share it with your friends. And be sure to friend Psyche Truth on Facebook. Thanks.